The Stars and Stripes show is brought to you by the U.S. Embassy.
It's Gabs FM Power to engage your world. Now, I did promise you a conversation regarding climate change, and we are getting straight into it. Now, the theme for the Stars and Stripes show, as I'm saying, is adapting to climate change in Botswana. And to go ahead and discuss this very, very important topic, we have in studio U.S. Embassy's Regional Environment Officer, Suzanne Yonchi, in studio. Welcome to the show, Suzanne. A very good morning to you, and I'm trusting we're going to talk about climate change, and so I'm trusting you're enjoying the weather this morning.
Thanks, Kathy, and thanks to your listeners for joining us. It's great to be here in the studio. I'm really looking forward to our discussion.
Now, Suzanne, climate change is not a new conversation, and it's something that's pretty vast. It's been around for quite a while. I want to know, why are we hearing the global community giving it so much attention, especially recently?
No, thanks so much. That's a great question. And yes, you're right. It's really relevant, not just to the world, but to Africa, and especially here in Botswana. In fact, just this week, our Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, was in South Africa, and he really emphasized how even the United Nations recognizes that Africa is the most vulnerable region in the world to the effects of climate. We're already seeing adverse effects and impacts in Africa and here in Botswana on people, places, and nature. And we're increasingly seeing frequent and severe extreme climate and weather events, which is impacting around us. And you know what? Our climate is changing. It's no secret. And we really need to speed up the action we're taking, not just to reduce emissions and mitigate those risks of climate change, but how we adapt to it is just as important. And that's what I really wanted to focus here today, because everybody needs to really increase the pace that we're adapting to climate change.
I think, that's a very relevant one. And really, when you look at what you've just said, we talk a lot, but now when it comes down to the actual, actions, the steps, I want to know, especially with regards to the embassy and the American government, what actions you're taking to support the Botswana people to adapt to climate change.
Sure. No, thanks. Kathy, one of the reasons why your question and the subject is so timely is that the government of Botswana is about to host a UN conference on national adaptation planning. And it's going to be an expo where countries from all over the world are coming the week of August 22nd to right here in Gaborone to talk about their plans on how they adapt to climate change. And we're actually going to have some officials from Washington here to join that conversation. And, this builds on what we are doing in Botswana. In fact, we're engaging with the government and the people to support efforts and ambitions to meet the commitments to cut down those greenhouse gases, but also in adapting. And that really is relevant to the agricultural sector. And I'd love to talk more about that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, when you talk about agriculture and things like our self-sufficiency as far as feeding ourselves, that's definitely a conversation that we need to be speaking about, especially as a nation of Botswana. But let's look at some of the challenges that you see Botswana encountering because of climate change, and, part of the reasons why we will have to change, because ultimately nobody really wants to change. It is quite a difficult situation. I think that a lot of people think, this is comfortable. Why do you want us to change? So let's touch on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The last time I was on Gabs FM, we were talking about the issue of water, which is very much related to climate change. Yeah. And we talked about how 70% of the Earth's fresh water is consumed by agriculture. So that's a sector and an area where we really can, but also in adapting, and that really is relevant to the agricultural sector. And I'd love to talk more about that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, when you talk about agriculture and things like our self-sufficiency as far as feeding ourselves, that's definitely a conversation that we need to be speaking about, especially as a nation of Botswana. But let's look at some of the challenges that you see Botswana encountering because of climate change, and, part of the reasons why we will have to change, because ultimately nobody really wants to change. It is quite a difficult situation. I think that a lot of people think, this is comfortable. Why do you want us to change? So let's touch on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The last time I was on Gabs FM, we were talking about the issue of water, which is very much related to climate change. Yeah. And we talked about how 70% of the Earth's fresh water is consumed by agriculture. So that's a sector and an area where we really can adjust the way we and farmers are using their agricultural practices to adapt to droughts, erratic rain patterns. And a lot of this is about using agricultural technologies. Look, farmers use tools, right? Tractors, shovels, plows. They need to have access to those technologies and tools in order to adapt to climate change, like using drought-resistant seeds, for example, biotechnology. And one of the things that we're doing at the U.S. Embassy is helping the Botswana people access those tools. And in fact, last year we did a big road show all over the country where we were with the Ministry of Agriculture talking to farmers and communities about these tools and some of the best practices in using them.
All right, let me do this and we will continue our conversation. I did say that I will be opening up our various platforms for you to engage with us. We'd love to hear your thoughts on some of what we're saying. We'd love to hear your input to the conversation. But for now, let me tell you this. It is 11:09 and this time check is very proudly brought to you by Access Bank. Access Bank is more than banking. All right, 11:11 is the studio time. And like I said, I will open up the phone lines in a very short while, the SMS line and the WhatsApp line for you to engage and interact with us. I'd love to hear your take on it. I know I've had conversations with people who said, climate change, there's no such thing in Botswana. We've just always been a very droughty nation. And so really some of these things are just part of what it is. But the way I see it, we started to have rain in winter, and that's something that we haven't really had before. So let's get to some of these issues, Suzanne, and look at why agriculture is so important. I mean, you talked about a roadshow that you did partnering with the Ministry of Agriculture and pretty much going around the nation. I want to talk about why, as a nation, that is so important to us, and especially within the conversation of climate change.
No, yeah, as I was saying, we did this roadshow. I think we traveled something like 7,000 kilometers all over Botswana in 35 days to 11 different districts, talking to farmers and community members about, the tools that farmers should be able to access in order to adapt to the rain in winter, more severe droughts. And I want to note this is an issue not just important to Botswana, but it is a global issue. And what we are trying to do are mobilize the global resources to help support this issue. Everybody hears about COP26, COP27, so what is that?
Yeah.
So the UN holds these big international climate change conferences. And last time it was in Glasgow, and at COP26, our President Biden committed to working with our Congress to dedicate $3 billion a year to help people in the most vulnerable areas adapt to climate change. And that includes Africa. And so we're really looking forward to the next COP, which is going to be in November in Egypt, where we'll be able to build on those efforts and really look to leverage more support for farmers, for Africa, including those here in Botswana. And, one of the reasons why we do care about this issue is it is near and dear to our hearts. And personally, I'm from California, but I wasn't always from California. My grandparents were actually climate change migrants. I mean, even back in the 1920s and the 1930s during the Depression, there was a huge drought in Texas where my grandparents lived and where there were farmers. And they had to leave Texas because they couldn't grow anything. And they heard that, there was water in California and that there were all kind of orchards and where they could work and pick. And they came to California. And that's how my family ended up there. So it is something, we think that droughts or, rain is just a part of the seasons. But when you have these erratic changes, it can really impact people's lives.
And I think that's a beautiful story for you to share with us. Thank you for doing that, because I think too much of the time we tend to think, that's government's problem. That's someone else's, it's not me, it's them. So just you giving us that example shows that it actually touches us. It has touched us, and most likely will probably touch us even in ways that we need to start thinking about right now. But talking still on that roadshow, how have farmers, how have people within the industry or the sector of agriculture, how have they received, you've talked about the tools and the technology that is available and the awareness that you're trying to put out there. Are they coming on board?
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, look, we face some skepticism because I think also when it comes to farming or raising livestock, there are traditions that you use. So there was some skepticism, in comparison. But instead, we really did observe genuine interest and intrigue from most participants regarding the benefits of using tools like biotechnology. A lot of farmers really welcomed it as an innovative means to adapt to the challenging growing environments. Some noted that, Botswana should really start using biotech, given a lot of the food it imports is using that, and to be able to compete with food imports. So again, it's about having the tools that are already being used.
And of course, making them available, to Botswana around the nation. But let's do this. I'm not alone on this conversation. I've got my colleague in studio, Swifty Swift.
What's up? I'm fashionably on time. But anyway, moving swiftly along. You know the system me down. Yeah, the classic. Famous, that's a good excuse, right?
So that's what you're saying. That's your story.
Down. Let's move along swiftly. Look, the Stars and Stripes Show America in Botswana is a great platform where we're educating and talking shared culture.
Yeah.
And do you know what a charge is?
Oui. Je parlais un peu de français, so je sais, je chargé d'affaires.
Ask the acting ambassador, but at least you get it. It's the next segment where you are able to engage the U.S. Embassy on their social media platforms about any burning questions that you might have, anything that you'd like to understand, anything that you'd like to engage the human element of who the U.S. Embassy is in Botswana. It's a great platform. I must encourage all Botswana and everybody listening to definitely follow their social media pages. It's a great platform where you can engage directly with the embassy. And we all have these questions that there's a lot of assumptions around the U.S. Embassy, that there's lots of U.S. dollars in those walls, that, it's easy come, easy go. But the U.S. Embassy is just generally a place that will give you the feedback that you need. And what I love about the U.S. Embassy is that even the difficult questions, they're always willing to engage with you and they will never shut you out. So, of course, we're going to go cross over into Ask the Shah. Chargé. Hey, I can't get it as well. Or ask the acting ambassador. So we're asking the acting ambassador this question. What is one of the highlights of our bilateral relationship between the United States of America and Botswana? Let's play.
That's a fantastic question. The U.S. government is really, really impressed with Botswana's leadership on democracy and good governance issues. And of note, in November 2021, Botswana's highest court affirmed the fundamental rights of LGBTQI plus persons, making Botswana one of the few countries in Africa to do so. Separately, we've seen firsthand that elections here are transparent and well organized. Politicians respect constitutional limits on their tenures. We work closely with the government of Botswana and civil society on several democracy building activities, including youth outreach and promoting women's participation in the political process. 2 weeks ago, I had the pleasure to speak at the government of Botswana's Democracy Summit, which was co-hosted by the National Democratic Institute. The themes of the conference, constitutionalism and democratic consolidation in Africa, are essential issues to discuss in the current global environment, where many nations and regions are struggling with growing authoritarianism and a backsliding of democratic values and institutions. The summit, kicked off by His Excellency President Masisi, discussed the many ways that we can together strengthen democracy in the face of these challenges, including bolstering term limits, promoting the participation of women in politics, exploring the critical role that the press plays in upholding democratic norms, and of course, how we can harness one of Africa's most valuable resources, its youth, to bring about change.
It's Gabs FM, powered to engage your world. The Stars and Stripes show, proudly brought to you by the U.S. Mission in Botswana, and of course in partnership with Gabs FM America in Botswana. Thank you so much to Amanda, Her Excellency Amanda Jacobson. You know, one thing that I like, Kathy, is that, you know, the relationship is a shared economy, and whether we like it or not, the social contract of trust is an important component of bilateral relations, that we trust one another. And you know, whether we like it or not, we're seeing the shared economy birthing or being rebirthed. Look at how Palama Kombi, look at Uber, look at Motelo. That is all a shared economy, and that is what I love about the bilateral relationship between Botswana and the U.S., including the AGOA agreement. That's one thing
you know,
that we've got to touch on.
I follow,
you know,
quite passionately on you know, the show that I do, the business show.
Yes.
So AGOA is very near and dear
Yes.
to my heart. So
I think I need to throw you some AGOA content, and then we can also discuss it on the Stars and Stripes show. But that is the objective of the Stars and Stripes show. It's basically to educate, to inform, and also show the human side of the relationship between the United States and Botswana. And of course, I've got Zeus in the building, and we're going to talk about that. He goes by the name Zeus and Khame. He wears two different
he's got
hats.
many hats. We were talking
there's
about
the entrepreneurship hat, which is Khame,
and then
there's
Zeus is the
Zeus.
artist.
But he's a good friend of mine, so now I'll be like Zeus Deuce, the Greek god. What up? But anyway, moving swiftly along, pun intended. Look, we're going to continue the conversation, but we're going to talk about higher education and talk about what is happening and the opportunities that the U.S. Embassy has to offer. Usually we have our favorite person in the building, who actually I co-host this particular segment called Chasing the Dream. And personally, it's one of the most important components, because people are swift. How did you go to the U.S.? What happened? How come you and not me? And this is where we educate you around those kind of topics and make you understand that, look, there are opportunities to go to the United States of America, all expenses paid. But you've got to qualify. You've got to ensure that you invest in yourself, your civic education, who you are. And what I love about American culture, I must say, and I don't love everything about American culture, but the one component that I love is their civic education and volunteerism. You know, you can get into a great university because of good character. You know what I'm saying? And that is something that I think character development is an important component, that we need to learn from that component of who the Americans are and say, look, maybe we should bring back Tirolos Chabo. It's a TS.
If you look at the valuation of it, you know, like you're saying, our version of it would be Boto.
Yes.
But if you look at how it's sort of, you know, we seem to be losing a bit of ourselves in the process. But you just mentioned the issue of education, and I know as Botswana we value education so very much. And when you're talking about the United States of America, you're talking about a place where you've got the Ivy League of education in terms of the university and tertiary institutions that are available there. So you've talked about investing on oneself and, you know, finding those opportunities. And can I just throw in there that there are quite a lot of opportunities? I think I recently saw one just recently, Fulbright, talking about how open for applications. So let's talk about what one needs to be thinking about, what they need to be, you know, looking at, and where they can find more information all around this. I think these are the conversations that a lot of people are at right now, because Form 5 results are out.
Yes,
a lot of people are trying to place themselves, their children. And then there are the Kathys of the world who are like, you know what, it's time for me to get a master's something in something. You know, so talk to us.
Okay, look, the educational opportunities that the U.S. Embassy offers through its Education USA office for prospective students, academics, and professionals. Now, you've got to listen up. Higher education accreditation in the United States. The U.S. higher education is different from many many other systems, Otla Kathy, around the world, as it is not subject to central government authority, and institutions are free to design their own curriculums, right? Regional and national accreditation of U.S. colleges and universities helps ensure that institutional standards are being met. To verify an institution's accreditation, visit the U.S. Department of Education or the Council of Higher Education. I think that's an important component that parents need to understand. And you can visit this particular website page on www.deac.org. www.deac.org. And that is what you can, garner or understand. I think in order to understand what you want to achieve, you've got to understand your end goals.
Yeah.
And it's always best. I always would like to encourage parents, the university student, the prospective student, even if your intention is not to do it this year, rather go through the Fulbright program, understand what it needs, what it requires from you. You might find that you need to do 150 hours of community service. Exactly. And now you can say, look,
start doing that
let's
now.
start now. Let me go and register with an NGO and, give myself in order to, apply for any of these programs. Yeah.
I think that's a very important point. Whether you are trying to do it next year, the year after, get your information now. Go ahead and, like you just said, that website, www.deac.org. And the beautiful thing you find, I believe, Swift, is that most of our institutions, most of these websites, you've got people who are very interactive on there. So it's not your typical, you're going to write an email and then system me down.
No. And to add on to that, Oabile Tau, she is hands-on. You can call her at the U.S. Embassy, follow them on the social media websites. She will not only listen to this, she will come to your school. She will come to your offices. She will come and educate you around all the opportunities available. As long as her schedule allows, she's more than willing to engage with you in terms of saying, look, this is what is needed for you to qualify for this and that and that. So please, a lot of people, I'd like to encourage you to, go onto the U.S. Embassy Gaborone website. Just try and educate yourself around Education USA, because it's a brilliant platform. I won't lie. Khame went on some of these programs. I went on some of these programs. Samantha Mogo went on them. Kialebo Dihutso, Sereti. There are so many people, Penyo Moroka, and so many other people that have gone in different facets or different elements of their industries and gone on and benefited. So whether you're a poet or an entrepreneur, they definitely have something for you.
And like you're saying, how convenient is it to be able to have somebody come to you, right, at your convenience, of course, and assist you with something that could be absolutely life-changing for you. But I think I'd also like those details, the details. I think you talked about social media. So if you have those handles, I'm going to want you to share them with us. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. If you have them, please do.
Look, the good thing about the U.S. Embassy and the World Wide Web is Google is amazing. You know what I'm saying? All you have to do is the U.S. Embassy Gaborone. Everything will pop up there. Even if you search U.S. Embassy Gaborone on any social media platforms, their handles are always there, and they're verified. So it's just that simple. And like I say, please, we'd like to encourage you, go and do the right thing, educate yourself, because where opportunities are, especially this is my thinking, tech. We're seeing the rise of blockchain. We're seeing the rise of crypto. We're seeing the rise of a lot of
We are basically in the fourth industrial revolution. It's not coming. We are in it.
We're inside.
And digitization is a conversation that, I really believe as Botswana, these are some of the opportunities that we can take, because especially when you look at the population, a lot of the time people say, we don't have the market. But when you look within cyberspace and within the industry of technology, where you are doesn't matter. As long as you've got Wi-Fi, it really opens the world to you.
And those are one of the components that drive the relationship between the U.S. government and Botswana. And young people, all of us must take advantage of these things. And that's why we need to engage with the U.S. Embassy, America in Botswana.
All right, we get into the BBC Minute in a short while. And remember, we're talking climate change and especially adapting it to Botswana. I'm going to share our platforms. Of course, we love for you to engage with us. I mean, that is our whole motto right here at Gabs FM. So 14962 is the SMS line. Our WhatsApp line is +267 3956 962. And you can also call in the studio line, which is 3956 962. So we get into the BBC Minute. And you know what? Swift wa rumalana la ha ntse ke nna ke mo rumelang ke ena nthumelang ka gore nna ka nne ke batla gore ke bolelle moretsi ke go surprise ke bolella oh my goodness I'm running up with
this pina go na le pina ntšha e bidwang kotsi wa itse motho ke kotsi motho.
Let's do this. The BBC Minute comes through. Stay with us.
Salajwe. Power to engage your world is on 105.3 FM.
Since the beginning of time, human beings have had a complicated give and take relationship with Mother Nature, which our very survival has depended upon.
I know one kind of again need or one. Kigaro Hongwele Wapilos Humisi industry Rodile.
A lot of us retselela mo tikologong ba thare tlhaloganye ditikologo tsa re tshelela mo go tsone.
The future, I think, for our country is going to be very tough.
It's been difficult for us to really break down the whole, make it a simpler topic.
The momokgaolong ya rona ke mathata hela
dingwaga di a tlhomagana re ntse re le mamme re sena dipoelo ka baka la dipula.
Agriculture cannot exist as an individual industry. We need everybody.
The studies that have been done of late, particularly our vulnerability assessment, shows that our vulnerability is increasing.
Such a heightened connection to nature through our lifestyle should make one of the world's most intensely debated issues for generations, climate change, a subject of constant concern and discussion for our subsistence farming national culture. But what is climate change to Botswana?
Francistown. Power to engage your world is on 96.8 FM.
All right, we continue on the show Stars and Stripes. Swift?
Stars and Stripes. The Stars and Stripes radio show, America in Botswana. So we're
that's
talking.
The tagline I was looking for. America in Botswana. That's that's the tagline I was looking for. Now we're talking climate change, and he's already given it away. You know, our partner spotlight for today actually features Khame Zeus Banti. Now he wears many hats. We've already mentioned that he's a director, he's a filmmaker, he's a marketer, he's an artist, and I believe that segment that you just heard, that clip is taken from something that he is working on or has been working on. I think the project is actually already done. But let's do this. Let's take this time to welcome Khame Zeus Banti into the studio. Good morning. How are you?
Good afternoon. Oh, it's still morning.
It's
Sorry,
still
morning.
It's
Thank you.
morning.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. There's so much to say. I must jealously shout out the Mandela Washington Fellowship before we go too far because like Swift said, you know, I've been a beneficiary of a lot of programs, especially around exchange from the United States Embassy. The very first one I went for actually was the International Visitors Leadership Program.
Nice.
And I reached out to them for that, you know, and they were very gracious. I'd been nominated for the Afrimas, and since I was going to Dallas already, I was like, what can you put me on? And it was incredible to be able to visit organizations that worked primarily in social enterprise, that use the arts to drive messaging. Funny enough, I've got shades from Create Now, which is one of the organizations we visited in LA, you know, and moving on from that, the following year, I applied for the Mandela Washington Fellowship, which, if you know, is really about leadership. You know, we sometimes have the wrong insights when it comes to what exactly leadership is in our communities. You know, we think leadership comes through titles. We think it comes through position. Whereas, you know, like the great Barack Obama said to us even at a town hall, you know, if you want to lead, you do not require office, as in political office or, you know, big executive office. It's all about figuring out what it is that you want to make a change in and doing that.
Well, we're talking climate change today, and I believe the snippet we just played is from something that you put your blood, sweat, and tears into. Talk to me about what the climate film is, what is going on. Is it done? Is it out? Can we check it out? What's going down with it?
It's such a long story, which started in 2019. Well, I'll say started in 2019 in terms of actually moving the project somewhere. But for me, as an area of interest, it's something that I've grown up with since I was a kid. You know, my mom is a science teacher at the very beginning of it all, before she went into admin and so many other things. You know, so I grew up with an affinity for science. I always loved science. I did bio and chemistry very well. But I ended up falling more in love with, you know, business subjects, languages, and all of that. But growing up in front of the TV again in the 90s, stuff like Captain Planet. You know, there was a cartoon series called Nature Knows Best. You know, later on, Al Gore, An Inconvenient Truth. You know, when we get to the harder format stuff. You know, all this stuff was very influential in how I consumed media, especially around climate change. You know, and I think it dawned on me very early on that we need to consider our own actions, our own consumption patterns and consumer behavior and the like, you know, and moving a step further, once you start getting to industry players and, you know, government policy, there's so much that we can do within our own capacity to be able to move the needle forward. Back to the origins of the story, I must shout out Botswana Climate Change Network, because I approached them with the idea to say, look, it troubles me that every time we speak about climate change or we hear about climate change, even on the continent, meaning Africa, we hear the ice caps are melting, which means nothing to us. You know what I mean? We don't have ice caps, you know, but we do need to understand what that means for the rest of, you know, the global ecosystem, you know? So my thought was, okay, let's take this conversation and bring it home. You know, what does climate change mean to Botswana? Just like you heard in that clip, which is from the trailer that we shot in 2019. Botswana Climate Change Network was very gracious to fund a small pilot that we did. Moving on, pitch to BTV around lockdown time. They loved it. They gave us a slot, but it was sponsor funded. So we had to go and find money for it, you know. Knocked on doors weren't opening eventually until late last year, when the US Embassy supported us with a grant that allowed us to at least complete what would be the first half of the season 1.
Wow.
You know, so
that's where you're at now.
We're
first
done.
half of season 1, or
essentially we've actually come to terms with BTV to say, look, maybe let's go for an 8-episode season 1 instead of necessarily trying to fill out 13 episodes when we're still looking for more partners. By the way, we're definitely looking for partners going forward.
So hint, nudge, nudge.
Hint, but I must say this, and we'll talk a bit about greenwashing later. We want partners that are actually walking the talk. Because this is not the kind of thing which you can pay lip service to. You know, and this goes for everybody, whether we're talking, I mean, I'll start by saying, it always troubles me when we're told to use paper straws, but industries aren't doing much, countries aren't doing much, you know what I mean? I really want to see everybody from macro to micro, you know, do something different. And we talked about commitments, you talked about trust. You know, following through on these commitments, that's been one of the big talking points with COP, for instance. You know, climate justice, that's a whole other conversation I want us to also be very cognizant of as Africans. We've got a carbon footprint of less than 5% of emissions globally. You know, it's no secret that the environment and the climate was destroyed by capitalists for profit. You know, and that same kind of thing is still happening even today. You know,
Sorry to interject, Zeus. Can you just define what a climate change ka Setswana? What is climate change? Because
climate change.
Yeah, because sometimes I feel like we're in the subject of climate change. There's a bit of a disjoint or an education vacuum right there. For Botswana or climate change, for COP26, we're discussing the environment. What does that mean?
It's just like the ice caps, right? So this is exactly why I found it important to try and create content that will be more localized. And language is an important thing.
Yes,
I love that, for instance, so many of the people you heard in those clips spoke Babuya ka Setswana. Now, when you talk terminology, the common phrase most people would use meaning climate change, which is almost like a direct
translation.
Exactly, right? But then one thing I find confusing about it, which I've noticed even some respondents when you're getting public opinion, people sometimes can't differentiate between the weather and the climate. So when you say they're thinking the change of weather. Which is obviously a much shorter term kind of thing. Whereas climate change is much more serious when we're talking about, it's not just a question of the fact that it was cloudy earlier today and then now it's raining. We're talking about, like she mentioned earlier, seasons that no longer even follow the set order that we've come to understand. And we know that influences how we plant, how we harvest, if we plant, if we harvest, you know what I mean? So these are very, very crucial life-defining issues. And to close off on the language issue, I've reached out to a couple of institutions already. This is some of the stuff that I want to see as legacy projects. We need to come to a point where we standardize terminology. It shouldn't be about me coming up with my own translations.
So I was just about to say,
subtitles.
So is there an actual official way to say climate change?
To my knowledge right now, we don't necessarily have, I'd say, an official toolkit. And these are some of the things that I would love to see. I've spoken to people like Retapelo Tlogetswe, who's an incredible linguist. We want to see institutions come together. And the beautiful thing now is you've got all this power of academia, BUST, UB. I got the chance to visit places like the Okavango Research Institute, which is a UB baby, and I must say all of this was obviously empowered, as I mentioned earlier, by the US Embassy grant, and it's been such an incredible thing for me to see, just from an administration standpoint, the big shift and the big call to action we've seen since President Biden came into office. And I think it speaks volumes as to what political will can do or can't do. I mean, this past week we've seen again, what you call it again? The inflation.
Yes, the recent highest inflation.
There's a whole new policy shift that's happened. That brings in this program, which is quite incredible. I think.
And I mean, one of the things that I think people that also needs to be part of the conversation, and Secretary Blinken raised this in South Africa earlier this week, is the economic opportunities that come out of addressing climate change. And that's exactly what the Inflation Reduction Act addresses is, investing in renewable energies, investing in efficient infrastructures as a means to combat climate change, both mitigate and adapt, but also grow our economy and create those opportunities.
On that point, it's so major, right? Especially coming off of COVID. Countries like Egypt have been running with this thing in terms of using the reset. Remember when everybody said COVID was a reset moment? It seems people forgot to reset because a lot of us have gone back to the old ways, right? And that speaks to even
circular economy.
We need to be shifting there. This is the chance to truly, truly change things around. I mean, I say all the time, it doesn't make economic sense for me that our whole world economy, not just here, is pegged onto energy prices. So the minute the full price spikes, everything gets out of hand, especially for countries like ours that are importing up to 80+% of our food. And like she's saying, what does that mean for production? And what does it mean, especially if we're able to produce efficiently? Okay, we need water. We're a drought-stricken country, and that's getting worse, right? The cycles are becoming even shorter. Forget 4 or 5 years. It's every 2 odd years now. What does that mean for water harvesting? There are opportunities around this. You know, how are we approaching our land management and usage, waste management? You know, things like landfills. I honestly don't understand why we still have, you know, a waste management strategy that's still so anchored on throwing things away, whereas, and going to create more waste, buy more plastic, whatever. Whereas when I watch, you know, progressive content from other parts of the world, guys are making $100 sneakers in India using plastic from landfills. You know, so imagine BK Proctor being able to do that. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, I think the other thing is that, you know, and maybe this feeds into the challenge in how do you translate or define the term climate change, but it is so cross-cutting across, you know, so many sectors. It isn't just an environment issue. It is an economic issue. It is a health issue. It is a security issue. It's a social issue. You know, at the U.S. Embassy, it is a mission priority, but we don't have just one paragraph in our strategy on climate change. It fits into all of our other mission goals, whether that's health, economic growth, security, you know, outreach. And then of course, environment and conservation as well.
I learned some very disturbing things, and I love that she mentioned this about some of our organizations right now in Botswana. We have organizations that are, and a lot of them are playing in spaces like agriculture, you know, that are obviously directly impacted. But you find that when you go to their strategic planning, there's little to no mention of climate change. You know, that is literally us going into the future blind, you know, let alone coming to a point where we're talking, bringing in adaptation strategies, mitigation strategies that will work for us. And that whole cross-cutting element is something that shaped how we directed, or how I conceptualized the series. Because one of the reasons why I found it so important to be a documentary series instead of just one standalone, is because we're talking transport. We're talking energy. We're talking water. We're talking agriculture. Even agriculture is like a whole world in itself, whether you're talking crop production or you're talking animal rearing, you know? So there's so many other things. And by the way, these were just even the first episodes I thought of. As we were going through the project, you know, we've already cut the first episode now, which is the transport episode. The rest should be done in about 2 weeks. I hope BTV won't kill me for saying this, but we're really crossing fingers that September will go to air on Botswana television.
Nice.
So yeah, and again, I'm very excited about that as a public platform, a free platform, because we must have this reaching everybody from Mashoro to Matete, you know, and not just, you know, middle class elites, because that's what climate change has turned into for most of the world. It's become an elitist subject, you know.
Well, it's Gabs FM, Power to Engage Your World, the Stars and Stripes show, America and Botswana. A great conversation. I think I must holler at Aisha, and we need to have more of these conversations, because, you know, while he was speaking, I was already deep in and saying that, you know, this is such an important conversation to have. Not only, and I love the way the both of you put it, you know, to cross-pollinate the conversation in terms of policy, opportunity, health, and everything else. Yeah.
And you know, Swift, I think it's so important to talk as also while you're at it about the opportunities, because I think too much of the time, especially in Africa, I think you just touched on this, Hamid, to say Africa at the end of the day hasn't really benefited much, if I can put it that way, hasn't really done as much as other developed countries and continents as far as utilizing these resources. And so there's this whole conversation, and I've heard a lot of people talk about this, to say, but you know, we haven't really utilized, and they have all these resources, and you guys want us to not use them. Like, come on, that's not, you know. So all of these, I think
coal,
it's exactly. So these are conversations that I think it's so important to have. And I mean, for me, I'm personally very, very passionate. You talked about waste management, and there's a couple of projects I've seen where literally waste can be turned into energy. And you look at Botswana, and you're like, but we're always crying about energy in Botswana. We have the highest number of sunshine days. Again, this one is a personal pet peeve. Why are we not solar powered everything in this nation? You know, some of these conversations is where there's opportunity, and yes, there can be, you know, initial costs involved, but in the long run, you know, there's opportunities that I think people really, really should talk about. So in fact, let me bring that to you and bring it now to corporates. We want to talk corporates and look at in terms of the strategy that corporates need to be thinking about regarding climate change. What's your perspective on that?
Sure. Look, my first and most immediate concern is greenwashing.
Yeah.
You know, if you've heard the phrase, or if you haven't heard the phrase, what it's essentially means is presenting a picture of taking climate action in your organization, but you aren't actually doing much.
So you're just paying lip service.
Yes, exactly. Which is something that just from a CSR standpoint, I think we've become very good at. Because even just understanding the notion of what corporate social investment is, a lot of our entities don't. We think it's you know, the odd charity thing. A lot of it is not even anchored around any kind of strategic direction,
or
which makes
sustainability,
you see, which makes it hard for you to have any kind of impact, you know. But if you have strategic plans, which are very, very well researched, that are grounded in action, that are also grounded in bringing in custodians, people that actually do the job, because you know, this is a speciality area. You know, I saw something recently from the Botswana Stock Exchange where they were talking about green financing, you know, and what they're trying to do around that space. And that's a big hot topic right now. You know, it's great to see, again, now I'm just giving brands free mileage, but, you know, I love brands that are doing something. The likes of Standard Chartered, you know, they've shifted their main mall branch to full solar. They're trying to get a carbon-free footprint for their branches by a certain point, you know, and these are the types of things that I want to see industries do, you know, as part of adaptation and mitigation strategies, you know. So that's what we really want to see more than anything else from corporate. And you know, let's back it up with action. And by the way, it's not just corporate, even public sector, you know, because as countries, we're making all these big plans, and a lot of these plans are brilliant, but are we implementing? You mentioned implementation earlier. We mentioned following through on commitments, you know.
And I think we, you know, in the private sector, the public sector, we need to look at green strategies, not necessarily as a cost. You know, I think there's this a perception that it's just too expensive. It's a cost.
This is so expensive.
I don't want to bear that
when
cost.
You look at it as an investment.
As an investment, especially for the future, for the next generation. I think, and that is why, you know, we had a brilliant show together saying, you know, we're running out of water globally. We're running out of water. Can you imagine what kind of wars we would have if there was not enough water?
You know, great point you just raised there.
Liquid gold.
Issues like conflict. You know, climate change is often, again, looked at from this almost hippie lens. But people don't see that, you know, there are real, tangible, you know, repercussions that will come with this. And like she mentioned, migration. These are issues that are already happening in parts of the continent, you know, where now you've got conflicts arising because of all of this. You know?
No, absolutely. I mean, you know, water security is a national security issue, and that's definitely the U.S. government's approach. The White House just, you know, released a national security strategy for Southern Africa, and there are 4 kind of buckets there, and that 4th is climate change. You know, because we realize, you know, what a priority it is and what a threat it is to security and conflict. So, you know, I think that's a space you're going to see more engagement, and, you know, whether you're talking about, you know, sanitation and the importance of water, or for, you know, land use, it's definitely a huge area that we need more focus.
I just wanted to add an issue around innovation, right?
Yes.
You know, and this is across the board. This is one of the big takeaways that I want people to be able to take once they've done watching the show. You know, when we talk about things like water, I remember seeing years ago our gel solution thing that somebody was trying to make for us to be able to take showers with. You know, and it sounds ridiculous right now, but this might be the future that we're facing. You know, because you and I know, like, I get. So we need to start shifting our mindsets to that. And then when you mentioned investment, a word we hear often, transition, especially with energy. And it makes you wonder, okay, where is the transition? if we're still putting off the startup investment, right? And when you say expensive cost, it's a hilarious thing to me because I'm like, look at us right now. We're in the middle of an energy crisis. Well, the rest of the world is starting to feel it now, but we've been in an energy crisis since way back.
Years.
Things like, I was shocked when in Australia, they were crying about load shedding. Brother, we've been load shedding here since I was in Boston. You know what I mean? Yeah. And when you think about what that cost means in
the
terms
long
of,
run,
we are already in a very expensive situation. So you might as well prioritize well to get great value.
Absolutely.
We've got exactly 5 minutes left, and I want us to finish off touching on what you're hoping. I mean, you've touched on like you're hoping people can take the innovation aspect of it. Yeah. I'd like you to actually also just break down what it is you're looking to do, and then we'll close off the conversation.
Sure. First major thing is get a good picture of what status quo is across industries, across spaces, depending on the theme of the episode. The pilot was a very general overview, and we were very, very blessed to have the likes of Rekoboto from Ministry of Environment. I believe he's the permanent secretary now. Share government position and the like. Going also into the NGO space with people like Tracy and many other NGOs that we got the chance to interview and get a sense of, okay, what are you doing? What are your challenges? That should lead us to a place where we sell adaptation and mitigation strategies. That if you forget everything else, what I want you to do, whether you're a business leader, whether you're a leader in government, whether you're a farmer, an artist, whatever you are, figure out what this means to you. How can you do something that can potentially change, the trajectory we're on? There's a brilliant guy who I love in the pilot, Lex from Buan. And they were working on a project around drought resistance in cowpeas. So this is genetic stuff, genetic coding stuff that hopefully should get us to a point where now we're also making kind of hybrid seeds and the like. And I know there's been a lot of conspiracies and this, that, but the bottom line is you need to look at what works out there in the field. And there's a lady who mentioned she mentioned she mentioned in that pilot episode that, at least with the maize, if she's got a hybrid, you know what I mean? So we need to get to a point where we're using the technology, but I don't just want us to be consumers in the next era, in the next generation. That's been an African problem for way too long.
That's where the innovation aspect comes in.
Exactly. This is where we need kids go abuse all these institutions, all these people. And it's not just kids who are in institutions. It's indigenous knowledge. That's something that, again, we underestimate its value because we know certain things about seasons. We move, our grandparents, and there's certain things they understood. And preservation of food and the like. My grandmother made madila, made biltong. I buy those things. I don't make them. You see where the problem is. So we need to get to a point where we're innovating, and owning the technologies, owning the IP. Botswana, for me, when you mention Sunshine Days, we should have battery centers here. We need to have, the biggest electric vehicle companies wanting to open hubs here because our scientists, because our environment allows.
Hey, we're fast run out of time.
My bad.
The Stars and Stripes show probably brought to you by the U.S. Mission in Gaborone, America in Botswana. Great conversation, Kathy. And whether we like it or not, an important conversation. I don't know how we can stress this enough. Because we don't want to see a situation where, God forbid, there's destruction. And inherently, when there's scarcity, man thinks for himself. That's how conflict starts. Where there's scarcity, it'll create a lot of conflict. And these are important conversations. I must applaud the U.S. Embassy for really, really driving these conversations. I'm so proud of you, my friend.
Thank you.
Not only as a rapper, as a musician, but as an entrepreneur who's doing something with a difference. Hohela Jarata, we can forget that Hohela Jarata is a brilliant cultural natural thing that we do, but how does that affect the climate? What does it mean for soil erosion? And things like that. And this is where the Cathys, the U.S. Embassy, the Zeuses used to have to use the Stars and Stripes radio show to really, really give Botswana content that matters and content with a difference and content that educates.
The Stars and Stripes show was brought to you by the U.S. Embassy.
All the hits, all the time. Camps FM.